The Norway Debate, sometimes called the Narvik Debate, was a momentous debate in the British House of Commons from 7 to May 9, 1940, during the Second World War. The official title of the debate, as held in the Hansard Parliamentary Archive, is Conduct of the War. Scheduled in advance, it was initiated by an adjournment motion enabling the Commons to freely discuss the progress of the Norwegian Campaign. The debate quickly brought to a head widespread dissatisfaction with the overall conduct of the war by Neville Chamberlain's government. At the end of the second day, there was a division of the House for the members to hold a no-confidence motion. The vote was won by the government but by a drastically reduced majority. That led on 10th of May to Chamberlain's resignation as Prime Minister and the replacement of his war ministry by a broadly based coalition government, which under Winston Churchill governed the United Kingdom until after the end of the war in Europe in May 1945. Chamberlain's government was criticized not only by the opposition but also by respected members of his own Conservative Party. The opposition forced a vote of no confidence, in which over a quarter of Conservative members voted with the opposition or abstained, despite a three-line whip. There were calls for national unity to be established by formation of an all-party coalition, but it was not possible for Chamberlain to reach agreement with the opposition Labour and Liberal parties. They refused to serve under him, although they were willing to accept another Conservative as Prime Minister. After Chamberlain resigned as Prime Minister, he remained Conservative Party leader. They agreed to serve under Churchill. On 9 and 10 of May, Chamberlain attempted to form a coalition government with Labour and Liberal participation. They indicated an unwillingness to serve under him but said they probably would join the government if another Conservative became Prime Minister. When Germany began its western offensive on the morning of the 10th, Chamberlain seriously considered staying on but, after receiving final confirmation from Labour that they required his resignation, he decided to stand down and advised the King to send for Churchill as his successor. Background: in 1937, Neville Chamberlain, then Chancellor of the Exchequer, succeeded Stanley Baldwin as Prime Minister, leading a national government overwhelmingly composed of Conservatives but supported by small National Labour and Liberal National parties. It was opposed by the Labour and Liberal parties. Faced with an irredentist Nazi Germany, Chamberlain attempted to avert war by a policy of appeasement, abandoned only after Germany became more overtly expansionist with the annexation of Czechoslovakia in March 1939. One of the strongest critics of both appeasement and Nazi aggression was Conservative backbencher Winston Churchill who, although he was one of the country's most prominent political figures, had last held government office in 1929. After Germany invaded Poland on September 1, 1939, the United Kingdom and France declared war on Germany. Chamberlain thereupon created a war cabinet into which he invited Churchill as First Lord of the Admiralty. It was at this point that a government supporter, possibly David Margesson, the government chief whip. For 2.5 years, Neville Chamberlain has been Prime Minister of Great Britain. During this period, Great Britain has suffered a series of diplomatic defeats and humiliations, culminating in the outbreak of European war. It is an unbroken record of failure in foreign policy, and there has been no outstanding success at home to offset the lack of it abroad. Yet it is probable that Neville Chamberlain still retains the confidence of the majority of his fellow countrymen and that, if it were possible to obtain an accurate test of the feelings of the electorate, Chamberlain would be found the most popular statesman in the land. Once Germany had rapidly overrun Poland in September 1939, there was a sustained period of military inactivity for over 6 months that has been called the Phony War. On April 3, 1940, Chamberlain said in an address to the Conservative National Union that Hitler had missed the bus. Only 6 days later, on 9 April, Germany launched an attack in overwhelming force on neutral and unsuspecting Norway after swiftly occupying Denmark. In response, Britain sent land and naval forces to assist the Norwegians. Churchill, as First Lord of the Admiralty, had direct responsibility for the conduct of naval operations in the Norwegian Campaign. Before the German invasion, he had pressed the cabinet to ignore Norway's neutrality, mind its territorial waters and be prepared to seize Narvik, in both cases to disrupt the export of Swedish iron ore to Germany during winter months, when the Baltic Sea was frozen. He had, however, advised that a major landing in Norway was not realistically within Germany's powers. Apart from the naval success at Narvik, the Norwegian campaign went badly for the British forces, generally because of poor planning and organization but essentially because military supplies were inadequate and, from 27 April, the Allies were obliged to evacuate. When the House of Commons met on Thursday, 2nd of May, Labour leader Clement Attlee asked, "Is the Prime Minister now able to make a statement on the position in Norway?" Chamberlain was reluctant to discuss the military situation because of the security factors involved, but did express a hope that he and Churchill would be able to say much more next week. He went on to make an interim statement of affairs but was not forthcoming about certain operations that are in progress, as, "We must do nothing which might jeopardize the lives of those engaged in them." He asked the House to defer comment and question until next week. Attlee agreed, and so did Liberal leader Archibald Sinclair, except that he requested a debate on Norway lasting more than a single day. Attlee then presented Chamberlain with a private notice in which he requested a schedule for next week's Commons business. Chamberlain announced that a debate on the general conduct of the war would commence on Tuesday, 7th of May. The debate was keenly anticipated in both Parliament and the country. In his diary entry for Monday, 6th of May, Chamberlain's Assistant Private Secretary John Colville wrote that all interest centered on the debate. Obviously, he thought, the government would win through, but after facing some very awkward points about Norway. Some of Colville's colleagues, including Lord Dunglass, who was Chamberlain's Parliamentary Private Secretary, PPS, at the time, considered the government position to be sound politically, but less so in other respects. Colville worried that the confidence of the country may be somewhat shaken. Aftermath. Gaining the support of both Labour and the Liberals, Churchill formed a coalition government. His war cabinet at first consisted of himself, Attlee, Greenwood, Chamberlain, and Halifax. The coalition lasted until the defeat of Nazi Germany in May 1945. On May 23, 1945, Labour left the coalition to begin their general election campaign, and Churchill resigned as Prime Minister. The King asked him to form a new government, known as the Churchill Caretaker Ministry, until the election was held in July. Churchill agreed, and his new ministry, essentially a conservative one, held office for the next 2 months until it was replaced by the first Attlee ministry after Labour's election victory. Place in parliamentary culture. The Norway debate is regarded as a high point in British parliamentary history, coming as it did at a time when Great Britain faced its gravest ever danger. Former Prime Minister David Lloyd George said the debate was the most momentous in the history of Parliament. Future Prime Minister Harold Macmillan believed that the debate changed British history and, perhaps, world history. In his biography of Churchill, Roy Jenkins describes the debate as by a clear head both the most dramatic and the most far-reaching in its consequences of any parliamentary debate of the 20th century. He compares it with its 19th-century rivals, for example, the Don Pacifico debate of 1850, and concludes that even more followed from the 1940 debate as it transformed the history of the next 5 years. Andrew Marr wrote that the debate was one of the greatest parliamentary moments ever, and little about it was inevitable. The plotters against Chamberlain succeeded despite being deprived of their natural leader, since Churchill was in the cabinet and obliged to defend it. Marr notes the irony of Amory's closing words, which were originally directed against Parliament by Cromwell, who was speaking for military dictatorship. When asked to choose the most historic and memorable speech for a volume commemorating the centenary of Hansard as an official report of the House of Commons, former Speaker Betty Boothroyd chose Amory's speech in the debate. Amory, by elevating patriotism above party, showed the backbenchers' power to help change the course of history.